Hi, everyone. My name is Seth Noboa, and myself, along with my co-host Stephanie Banat, we are here this afternoon to interview Broncos Insider for Denver 7 ABC and a former longtime Broncos and Rockies beat writer for the Denver Post, Troy Renck. Good afternoon, Troy. How are you?
Doing fantastic. Thanks for having me on.
Excellent. So I want to start things off by just asking, what made you want to pursue sports journalism? Did you have to play sports growing up? Was there any particular articles that inspired you to want to pursue this field?
Yeah, I grew up in a sports background. My father coached my twin brother and I in sports since we were 5 years old through the age of 18. Roughly around seventh grade, eighth grade, when I realized that unless I was going to be a jockey or like the person that poses for the top of trophies, I wasn't going to be a professional athlete at 5'6". My parents were both small. So I figured I had a much better chance to write about professional sports than play them. And I had a fascination and love for Sports Illustrated from when I was really little. I mean, I want to say second grade, third grade, began reading just had a voracious appetite for Sports Illustrated. And it really kind of went from there. I was involved with my middle school newspaper as a sports editor and editor, then the sports editor and news editor for my high school newspaper, and then pursued a career and a major in journalism at the University of Colorado. So once I realized I wasn't going to play sports competitively, for me, the next best thing was to cover or write about sports. And that's what led to this journey for me to end up in journalism, both in print and now later with a second chapter in my life in TV.
Growing up, did you always want to cover Denver sports? Because I know that obviously we had with the Rockies and the Avalanche, for example, they're like newer teams, but I know that growing up probably with the Broncos and the Nuggets. So did you always want to be a part of Denver sports?
I wouldn't say Denver sports necessarily. I wasn't a Broncos fan growing up. I was a John Elway fan because his games were so exciting. Certainly the last 2 minutes, 3 minutes of games he was involved in. I was a Cowboys fan until Roger Staubach retired. And then I wasn't really a sports fan. I was more of a baseball fan of Ricky Henderson and those A's teams. So I wasn't looking to work necessarily in Colorado. What happened was I have a twin brother, my twin brother Tracy. It was just going to be too expensive for my parents to send us both out of state at the same time. And at CU, they had a good journalism school. It wasn't Missouri or Kansas or Northwestern, but for what we were going to do, it worked. And so that's how I ended up in Colorado. And when I will say, when I got to the University of Colorado and started covering University of Colorado football and basketball, but certainly their football team back then, this is when they were like Ohio State is now or Clemson is now. I wouldn't have minded to stay in Colorado at that point because I was covering huge events, huge games. I was traveling in college to games at Oklahoma, Nebraska, to the Orange Bowl. So, but it wasn't my dream to cover sports in Colorado. It was just my dream to cover professional sports at some point, whether it didn't really matter where it was. I just wanted to cover at that level.
Excellent. You mentioned Colorado University. Did you happen to have any internships while you were there? And yes, how did your time at Colorado University overall help towards your career?
Yeah, I mean, we lucked out, my brother and I. At that time, we got involved with KUCB, the campus radio station. He learned how to be a DJ, but also they offered a CU sports talk show. So we'd get guests for a football show. Again, and you have to understand their football team at that time was like first in the country. So it was like there was some gravitas to, if you get a Mike Pritchard or Darian Hagan or one of those players on. But the spring of my freshman year, I was able to go to the Colorado Daily, which was an independent newspaper, and not the campus paper, but an independent paper that was handed out free on campus. And they were looking for freelancers. And Mike Sandrock, who was the sports editor at the time, liked my clips. And so I started writing feature stories. And then he's like, you have a twin brother. We can start doing this column, Twin Picks, where you pick games for the football season. And to this day, it's just one of the crazy stories. I've never had more notoriety in my life than when we were doing Twin Picks, because being a twin in college was a weird thing for people. Even though, like in our high school, we had, I think, 5 sets of twins and a set of triplets in my graduating class. So it was not a big deal. But at CU, it was, for whatever reason, people just had not been around Twins. So that column, it had created this minor celebrity status that really helped with a lot of things. So you asked, did I do an internship? I didn't. I was the beat writer for the men's basketball team and the men's football team for 3 years, covering it as a beat and getting paid to do it by article. And then we were the voice, my brother and I did play-by-play and color for the men's basketball, women's basketball, and the football games. So I got spoiled. I didn't need to do an internship because I had so many things I was doing already and I was getting paid to do it. So I stayed up in Boulder year round, wrote year round. My parents luckily were able to let us do it because I wasn't making a lot of money, but I was making enough to where I could just do it and live in Boulder still. So I didn't, would I have benefited from an internship at a much bigger newspaper? Yes, I think I would have, but I wouldn't trade my experience for anything because I learned radio, I learned print, and I got a little bit of exposure to TV, and I was doing it with really good professionals. So there was technically an internship my senior year with the Daily Camera, I guess, because that was like more of a class for credit. So it was technically an internship. So we got to cover Rockies games, Broncos training camp, but it wasn't much different what I'd already been doing, frankly, because I could get a press pass to those events anyway. So that was technically an internship. What it did do, though, was we had to cover high school sports, and you learn how to keep your own box score and do agate. Like, there was an advantage of that internship. This is so long ago. This is like pre-laptops where you had to go back into an office and type a story. But that was an advantage, to be around people who've been in the profession for decades, to learn how to go cover a high school game, do the box score, do that, cover a high school football game. So there was an advantage to that. That technically at the Daily Camera was an internship.
Very nice. So of course now you moved over to television. That's what you're doing today, presently, for Denver 7 with the ABC. What was the big change that brought about the move to television, and were there some differences that you noticed in your first year or two of doing TV versus just being just a beat writer, reporter, just covering sports from that point of view?
Yeah, it is totally different. I never saw myself in doing TV. What happened, I covered the Rockies forever. And the 2007 season, their World Series year, we wrote a book off of it. And that was, I wasn't really aspiring to do anything else except eventually be a columnist. There was a point where I did not want to be a beat writer the rest of my life. My kids were growing up. And when you're a traveling baseball beat writer, you're on the road basically 200, 250 days a year. And it's made for young people like yourselves. It's not made when you have kids at home. And so I was looking to be a columnist. They didn't see me that way. I thought at one point I was going to be a columnist at the Denver Post. It didn't happen. Well, I eventually moved off the Rockies to the Broncos. They basically forced me off and said, the Rockies stink. We want to just make our Broncos beat great with you and Mike Kliss. And we had Nikki Javala, who's at the Washington Post now. We were all on the beat together for 1 year. Mike was the lead. I was the second. And Nikki was like our digital expert. And so I ended up back on football for that year. Mike leaves to go to Channel 9 to TV. That kind of set that path that it was possible. Then I'm the lead beat writer the year the Broncos won the Super Bowl. And because of that, I was doing TV for multiple stations, like coming on their Sunday sports shows. And I did it multiple times with Denver 7. And I didn't think anything of it. It ended in, whatever, February 2nd, whatever day the Super Bowl 50 was. And then in that July, I get a call. I'm coaching at a baseball tournament in Atlanta with one of my sons, and it's Lionel Bienvenu. He's like, what would you think about interviewing for a job? And I'm like, yeah, I'll be back in town for a couple of days, and then I'm going to be traveling again for my son's baseball. And I thought it was like to come on like on a weekly appearance or something. I wasn't thinking that they wanted me to be a sports anchor, sports reporter on TV. And I got in there, and they're like, we want to hire you. You'd be a Broncos Insider. We do talkbacks. You'd just be live all the time at camp, do reports. And I'm like, you're talking about a full-time position? And they're like, yeah. And I'm like, oh, I wasn't even prepared for that. Like, I didn't. So I basically said, well, to leave the Denver Post, which the Post was failing at the time, but I had job security because I was covering the Broncos. And I'm like, listen, I know the Post isn't in great shape, but I'm not in a hurry to leave because of, covering the Broncos. And I said, if you give me a certain contract, I would do it, thinking there's no way they would. I mean, I had no experience on TV. And they called me like 3 days later and they said, here's the deal. And I was like, man. And I'd been talking with my son, who was 15 at the time, and we were in Atlanta together at his baseball tournament. And he's more adventurous like I am. And he's like, geez, Dad, I mean, when else are you gonna have this opportunity? And the only thing was holding me back is I've got one kid in college or getting ready to enter college, and then one right behind him. And I'm like, it's a risk for my family if this thing goes south. That's why the contract being guaranteed for a certain number of years was huge. Because if it went south, I had to be protected to at least get my oldest through college. So, and it turned out it was the best decision I've ever made. And I love the people at the Post. The Post probably could have kept me if they'd made me a columnist. I'm not going to lie, because I get the stress of not being a beat writer. But the difference of TV, to your question, like when I'd write on Deadline all the time, I'd know where 500 words was, 750 words, and 1,000. I could literally feel it like a runner running a mile. Like I knew exactly where I was on Deadline and where I was with the copy. In TV, you have to learn to think in terms of time, not words. So they'd be like, okay, you have 25 seconds for this answer. Then we're going to throw to sound. And when we come back live, you got 15 seconds. That first few months was hard because when you're not used to a time issue, I do a lot of radio. The answers aren't timed. Like if you go over, you go over. You go over on TV, it goes to commercial. Like those are hard outs. And that's what I had to learn. The biggest thing is when you have someone in your ear talking to you live or on set, it's the most unnatural setting of, you feel like it's a hostage negotiation, light on top of you, sterile room, people in your ear, people over there yelling, and look natural. And there's nothing about it that's natural, honestly. But it was learning the time. And it just took like that first year of really learning what 30 seconds is, what a 10-second lead in is. And you have to get to the point way quicker. Like in TV, it's like, their defense stunk and are they ever going to find an outside linebacker? Like, that's it. You don't have time. In print, you would set up the story, a delayed lead. TV, there's none of that. It's like, make your point, throw to the sound, make a point. And that's I love it. And part of it, it's hard because sometimes you lose context that you don't, in a print story, you provide way more context that you can't provide in a 45-second hit on air. But but the trade-off is the lifestyle, the people, the environment is so much better. It's just, I'm my own boss. I can do what I want creatively. And they are just so supportive of everything I do that it's just turned out to be a blessing. And I never saw that coming. I mean, I thought it was going to be a grind that I never thought I would anchor. Like a lot of things that happened weren't supposed to happen, where like 3 months in, oh, we need you to anchor. And I'm like, I could do it, but like, I've literally never done this before. And this is a Denver market. And so my boss is supportive. The people above, they're just supportive. And I love talking, as you can see. So that part, it was just learning how to talk within guardrails and time constraints.
Excellent. That's great. I mean, that's crazy inside Troy. I mean, I'm actually going to turn it over to my co-host Stephanie because she happens to have some questions for herself. So whenever you're ready, Steph.
Hi, Troy. Thank you so much for being here today.
You got it.
So yeah, you kind of touched upon this a little bit, but I wanted to kind of hear about what it's been like jumping around, wearing different hats, as they say, throughout your career, as going from an editor to a reporter, columnist, beat writer. What was it like jumping around from all those different positions?
Yeah, when I first started when I left school in 93, the path was like the minor leagues. You go to smaller papers. So my first job out of school was Lake Havasu City, today's Daily News. I mean, the big news while I was there was they got a Red Robin and they added a stoplight. Like these are small cities. Like you're covering preps and water sports, but so you become you're listed technically as sports editor because you're a one-man staff or one-woman staff. So you have to learn how to edit your own copy, write headlines. Again, this is so long ago. We'd have to print out the galleys and they would, they'd basically with rubber cement put them down in the paper. So if there was a typo and it was on deadline. They would literally, the girl back would get a razor and take out if it was supposed to be an A instead of an and with a razor, and then they'd shoot the pictures. So you just learn how to work with people on deadline. You learn how to edit. When I was in Havasu, when I went to Yuma, Arizona, I was the assistant sports editor, and it was more of a title to get me more money, to put a title on it. But I was, you get better at copy editing, and you learn how to read your own copy on deadline. I had a great boss there, Bob Romanek, who's now in charge of, I think, all media relations at Grand Canyon University. But he was way over qualified for Yuma. His wife was from there. I think he might have been from there. But I was really blessed to be around him because he was an amazing editor. And so then I learned it when I went to, I was in Longmont, and Patrick Saunders, who's at the Post now, he was an editor. And it was funny, where I learned the most was from when you learn to edit your own stuff, you lose perspective of how it plays. So I learned how to copy edit, but I needed outside editors to tell me. And it was an editor and a columnist, Mike Litwin, who worked at the Baltimore Sun and Rocky Mountain News. But he gave me great advice one time, which he said, it's better to be clever than cute, because I use a lot of analogies in my writing, and you fall in love with them and you think everything you write's funny. Right. And sometimes it's not. Right. And what I learned was 3 average analogies are terrible. You're better off to have one clever one, or just don't use one, don't force it. But when you're the author of it, you think everything you say is funny. Like, that's the confidence of being a writer. And I had some editors, Rick Vasic, when I was at Broadband Sports, and again, Mike Litwin said it to me, but just being able to say, that line really works. You don't need the other 2. Because only people are going to remember is that line. So why bog the copy down with that? And don't overwrite. That was something I had a problem with early in my career. Is you're trying to turn every story into an award-winning story. And it's a 15-inch high school gamer, and it means the world to those kids. But you can't overwrite it to the point where it's the Super Bowl. Like, you have to understand the context of the event, and you can make it a great feature. You can be descriptive and do those things, but you can't overwrite it. And that's stuff I had to learn and just experience. Covering baseball, you write so many game stories. I mean, you're talking about writing. There's 193 games counting spring training. And so I was probably writing 150 game stories a year. I loved it. But that's where like anything, you do reps in life. Either you're eventually going to get really good at it, or you're going to quit it. And by writing all the time, it's like exercise or anything else. Eventually you get pretty good at it. And so what was it like? The only hard part I would tell you, Steph, was when I was at the Denver Post, and we do analysis pieces, and I'm covering the team. So in the analysis piece, it's more opinionated, and you're ripping the team, but you're the beat writer. Those roles, that's a hard place to be as a beat writer, when you're supposed to be kind of just covering the team every day and objective, but your bosses want, kind of a splash story, and you need to rip them, and you get caught in between sometimes of that role. It's more with management than the players, but that would be the only hard part. I loved writing columns. I think I could have been a really good columnist, but that wasn't my calling, and it turned out to be the best thing that I ended up on TV. But on TV, I can do opinion, and I can do straight, and it really, I have my own rank and file on Saturdays that's kind of my insider stuff and some opinion. And that blend works because of the way it's presented. But that would be the only thing, is sometimes as a beat writer, when you're trying to be a columnist, and then the next day you're back to being a beat writer, sometimes that's not great for you when you go into the locker room or see management and you need information. And you're like, aren't you the guy that just ripped us yesterday? Like, it's like, you can write an objective story ripping a team, just putting the numbers out there. They're terrible. Here's why. Yeah. But when you make it personal through a column, they take it more personally. And that can impact relationships on a beat that you need throughout the course of a season.
Wow. Gotcha. That definitely sounds like a lot to balance. I'm like you, I feel like I usually overwrite. So it sounds like moving into TV, you really have to learn how to just shorten it to the most important, like the meat and potatoes of what you're saying. But that was great to hear about. Jumping a little bit into the more digital realm, like, I know social media has become more and more prominent in journalism. what would you say that the impact of the impact of social media has been on your job as a reporter? Like the fact that it's allowed greater interaction with fans. What would you say on that?
I'd say it's been overwhelmingly positive, but what it's changed is that you never sleep. You're on call 24/7. When you cover a team like the Broncos, you know, if you're covering a AAA team or something, it's a little different. But the Broncos, there's like, I mean, you have four people from the Denver Post out there every day, ESPN.com, The Athletic, Channel 4, Channel 7, Channel 9, Channel 31. KOA has 2 to 3 people out there. And then NFL Network has someone out there. And so it's just a very competitive environment. And so you can't hold on to anything. Anything you have almost has to go out instantaneously if it's news. And everything with the Broncos in some ways feels like news. But how has it changed? You're just on call all the time. Like I'm doing this now and they're trying to sign a right tackle. So you're constantly on checking my text messages and, oh, is this going to go down? And because that part, it's once I learned the kind of the rhythm of it, it's fine. But there's times when you're out at dinner or I'll be driving, and because I live like an hour and 10 minutes from Broncos, so I'll end up having to pull over on the side of the road, text something, get back on the road, pull over, have my computer on in my seat, you know, with my jetpack in case I have to stop and write. That social media has just created an immediacy to everything that didn't exist when I got into the business. When I was at the Denver Post covering the Rockies, you would cover a game, you would do a 15-inch notes package, 16 to 18-inch game story, and then like a matchup box for the upcoming game. None of that started until you got to the game at 3 p.m. So you get to the game at 3 p.m. for a 7 p.m. night game. It's still a long day. I mean, it's 3 to midnight. But now there's times you've written 2 or 3 stories before you even leave for the game. If they make a trade or they sign a player or injury news comes down. So even on TV now, it's like, okay, the Broncos signed free agent. So I've got to write the story, do a video thing for OTT, our OTT platforms, Roku and all those platforms, and then send in something separate for news, and then find out, do they need me live on any of the newscasts? So it's just the immediacy of everything has changed. And the social media part, I use Twitter a lot. Facebook is more just to put my articles out. I have my personal Facebook and my professional journalist one. It's more for my articles. I share some stuff with my kids, their athletic exploits once in a while. But I've enjoyed Twitter. Originally, it was hard because I didn't understand the whole trolling concept and people on there that just, you know, are miserable because Twitter hates everything. But my Twitter followers have kind of been fine, you know, just refined to where it's a good community. There can be an exchange of ideas. We can agree to disagree for the most part. And if someone just insults me, you know, hey, I hate you, whatever, I just mute or block them. I don't block a lot of people. I love the mute button because a lot of people just want to be blocked as like some kind of weird badge of honor.
Yeah.
You know, women in journalism, it's 100 times worse. I mean, we just, you know, you just deal with idiots from opposing teams that somehow think you have it in for their team. And then it's like, okay, it's funny the first time, but I don't care about the Bears' safety. I don't. I mean, it's not personal. And the person keeps coming after you and you're like, okay, you're going to get muted. And then if you say something like, I hate you, or, you know, then I just block you. But for the most part, it's been a positive experience for me. It's been a learning experience. But having teenagers and growing up with that, I mean, my kids, one is just graduated college last year, and my youngest son is a sophomore in college right now. Having them around helped me navigate some of the pratfalls of social media because of the way they see it through their lens is totally different than I see it as a 50-year-old, you know, white male. So being around young kids, coaching kids for the last 15 years, being around those people, that has helped me some understand the medium better. But to answer your question, for the most part, it's been positive.
Got it. Yeah, it's definitely something to get used to. And I'm glad you mentioned that about women. I was actually also going to ask you, like, if you feel like it's harder for women to get into the field of sports journalism.
Yeah, I mean, there's just no way the numbers say it. I mean, I'm not going to sit here and shoot. There's just fewer doing it. And there's, you know, a lot of qualified women get passed over. A lot of qualified women, it's just a tough experience in some of these locker rooms. It's not great. You deal with just BS you should never have to deal with. You know, that's gotten better, certainly in the last 4 or 5 years. because some of these things have been exposed and put out in the open. So teams are more aware of it and how their athletes treat reporters, how other reporters treat reporters, frankly. I've seen at least some change in that regard, but it is hard. It's hard to be in a locker room where you might be the only woman in an all-male locker room, in football specifically. Baseball, I think, is a little more friendly in that regard. There's more women than when I covered baseball. There were certainly more women covering baseball than there were football. But it's hard just to begin with because you are the minority in there just by gender. And you deal with, just guys who, you just deal with meatballs. And how do you deal with that? Some of, I've dealt with like Alana Rizzo and Jenny Kavnar and Nikki Jabal. These are strong women who just, put lines in the sand like, hey, if someone says that, they make a point of it and it kind of ends it. And they have respect of the people in the locker room. I think it's unfair that they have to do their job like 5 times as well to earn that respect. But those women, they are respected by the players because they know what they're talking about and they're treated as equals for from, again, this is my observation, but I've seen it the other way where a young woman in the locker room gets intimidated, player will make some stupid remark, and then the woman just like, yeah, I'm not comfortable in here, understandably so. And then it affects the trajectory of her career because she's like, I don't want to deal with this. I'll go cover news and not deal with this just supercharged testosterone environment that is sports at times. So it is harder. And social media adds a layer to it that I don't envy at all and what women deal with on social media because it saddens me to see. And I, with Nikki working with her for a number of years, I would see it more firsthand of some of the crap she had to deal with. And it was disheartening, but she's just really hard-nosed, disciplined, and talented, and she wasn't going to let anything stop her. But it's not easy. There's no way around that. For
sure. Sounds like you have to have thick skin. So thank you for all of that. And then lastly, I think our last question, just to wrap things up, was what do you have any advice that you would give to young aspiring journalists like ourselves on breaking into the sports journalism industry?
Well, number one is you just got to be willing to work hard and show up and do it on every weekend, every holiday. Like you're just always available. That's a lot of sports, is just that you're reliable. You can work on deadline. That's the biggest difference from sports than other stuff you might cover. Can you turn around 750 words in 45 minutes after a high school game with a box score? Can I call you on Friday at 6:45? Hey, this guy's not available. Can you go to this high school game at 8 p.m.? Just being available all the time is a part of it because the schedule stinks early in your career. You're working weekends, you're working holidays, and you have to, my second point on that, you have to love the craft more than the sports. I get a lot of kids that say, oh, I love the Broncos and I love the sport. I know, but when you're doing the job, you're not a fan. You get the opportunity to sit on the 50-yard line and watch these games. It's the greatest thing in the world, but your job is to tell people what they don't know, take them where they can't go, and do it on deadline. You're not there with your face painted cheering. You're there to work. And if you don't love the craft part of it, of writing, of doing a live segment, like if that's not what gets your adrenaline going, you won't survive sports because eventually it's not a love for sports. Everyone that gets into sports journalism loves sports. Like that's the baseline. So when a kid's like, oh, I want to do sports because I love sports, I would hope so because everyone that's in this business loves sports. Do you love it enough to sacrifice relationships, times, weekends, work crazy hours until you get to a point where you're on a regular beat or whatever? Like that's it. Like I worked those minor league jobs but I didn't think anything of it because I just had my eye like eventually I'm going to be covering what I want to cover. So when I would work 70 hours a week covering the Rockies, it didn't feel like that. Because it's what I love. It's my passion. I love to write and I love baseball, or I love to write and I love football. But just understand that you have to be willing to put in the time. You have to be willing to do that little extra. If that's showing up, if it's you need to be there at 9, you show up at 8:30. If it's can someone stay after 5? Yeah, then it's not really different than athletics, frankly. The people that succeed in athletics, they typically do it before 8 and after 5. It's the lonely work. Are you willing to do that? Right. Once you are, then you get good fast and you distinguish yourself. So I don't want to paint a bleak picture like you're going to work all these hours for all these years. within a few years, if you do pay that price, you will distinguish yourself, because it's like this funnel that starts like this. And then by the time you're a couple years in, the funnel, it's like the width of it's like this, of people left that are willing to do this. And once you show you're willing to make that sacrifice, and you show you're reliable on deadline and coachable / talented, it happens pretty quickly within a couple years. But most kids burn out within a year or so, because you work every freaking weekend and your friends are still partying and they have social lives and they're going to Vegas and they're going here, and you're covering some high school event, but you're doing it as part of this ladder you're stepping on. And I'm not going to sit here and tell you it hasn't affected relationships. It was hard being married with kids. It's affected my relationship with my families, because I miss every 4th of July. I've missed Christmas. I've missed Thanksgiving. But I knew why I was doing it. I was all in. That's why I just tell kids, if you're not, that's fine. But don't think you're going to be the person that comes in and says, well, I just want to work Monday through Thursday. I don't want to work Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and I want to cover sports. That happens at the end of your career, where you've earned that right to not cover the games and work from home. So, and that's why some want to be editors, because you have an 8 to 5 schedule. One of the reasons I moved to football is because it's much more of a 9 to 5 schedule, and you travel 30 days a year, 35 days, compared to, a 70-hour a week with Rockies and 150 to 200 days on the road. Even I don't want to do the travel anymore. It's not worth it with my family. So those are things you'll figure out. You can't fake sports if you make a career of it. My own son is he's a baseball video scout right now. He's working crazy hours, analyzing video. He wants to work in a front office. And it's the same thing I talked to him about. This is the hard part. You just got to distinguish yourself, get really good at this, the foundation, and you will distinguish yourself to the point where you can make a career out of it. But these first few years, you're going to be eating top ramen. You're going to be, living in a crappy apartment. But if you're doing what you love, it won't matter. And a lot of kids get into sports and realize they love sports, but they don't love writing. They love sports, but they don't love being on TV or doing radio. You won't make it. You'll be miserable. You'd be better off doing something else.
Gotcha.
Excellent. That's a very, very sage advice from a longtime veteran in the sports writing business industry. So thank you so much, Troy, for coming on for this interview. And that was Troy Renck of Denver 7 ABC. I'm Seth Noboa.
And I'm Stephanie Banat, and we are signing off.